Bloop. All right. So today we're going to be talking about tips on writing the beginning of your novel. Now, last week we talked about National Novel Writing Month and some tips to help you power through and write your novel. Whether or not you decide to write a novel during National Novel Writing Month, I figured these videos would be helpful for whenever you do decide to start writing your novel. So today we're going to be talking about tips on writing the beginning of your novel. Now, when I say beginning, let's do the little classic structure here. When I say beginning, I'm going everything just before the inciting event. So the inciting event hasn't happened yet, but everything just before that. So the inciting event and everything that happens after that will be next week's lesson, and then the climax will be the one after that, and then the falling action and denouement will be the one after that. Denouement, or just ending. It's fancy word. I'm an English major. If you can't tell, I use the weird fancy terms. But point is, today we're going to be talking about that beginning just before the inciting event. So like the first 20 to 25-ish pages, depending on what you're writing. I would say generally 20 to 25-ish pages is perfect. If you start getting any longer than that, doesn't matter if you're writing a Brandon Sanderson-like novel, your readers start getting bored. You need the inciting event to be introduced within those first 20 to 25 pages, generally. I would say there are a few exceptions, but not many. That being said, let's just jump into that. I need the eraser. Okay. First, we're going to talk about what is the premise of your novel. So this is something that we talked about last time with pre-preparing. However, this is important to remember when you're starting your novel, is to keep in mind what is the premise of your novel. For example, if the premise of your novel is kind of a dark horror kind of vibe fantasy, then you could describe things in a more dark horror way. So it's going to help set the tone of your writing. So for example, you could have someone with their hair hanging in their face. Now the way you describe the hair hanging in their face is going to set a tone. So for example, if the premise of your novel, like I said, was dark horror or fantasy, then you could go something with like, her hair hung like cobwebs in a cavern crawling with spiders. That makes it much more like, scary vibe, even though it's just describing her hair hanging in her face, right? Same thing with if you want to give a more light-hearted fantasy vibe, a more like cheery fantasy vibe, more kids book kind of thing, for like 12 to, kind of Fablehaven stuff, 12 to 14-ish. Then you could describe the hair hanging in her face like this. Her hair hung in the air like spring sunlight through a window. That makes it much more calm, much more peaceful, much more happy, it feels good. So depending on your premise, that is going to change how you work with your novel. Because description is important. Description helps you to make your novel feel a certain tone. For example, if you had a novel where the whole time everything's cheery and wonderful, and then all of a sudden you have a description like her hair hung like cobwebs in a cavern crawling with spiders, you'd probably either be like, what? Or you'd be like, something weird's going on here. So it's important to keep your premise in mind when you're writing description even. Because the way you show, don't tell is going to help give your reader a sense of the story. It's the same thing with movies, right? With movies, a lot of the time, we have things like setting to tell us that. But with novels, you have to describe the setting, right? So depending on how you describe it, could give us a different sense of the novel. So for example, if you have a horror movie, generally having it in a more dark and drab place and a lot more spooky and eerie and old, that tends to be a lot more like frightening to people. Whereas if you had it set in a beautiful, sparkly, sunshiny meadow with butterflies and fairies, that doesn't feel as scary. You can make it scary, theoretically, if you wanted to be like, the meadow is perfect aside from the blood leaking from the flowers. Then all of a sudden you go, okay, now that's messed up, right? All of a sudden you're like, I am starting to see the tone here. So that can be eerie too in its own way, but you gotta make sure you set it up like that with your writing. Alright. Alright. Brief intermission that I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, but since we're talking about beginnings of your story, we have a first chapter contest that is going on and will be have all our entries due on the 30th of November. I'm looking forward to it. If you're interested in more details about that, we have entry forms at the front desk upstairs. Now keep in mind, upstairs front desk, not the downstairs front desk. And if you're concerned at all about what we're grading on or what we're judging on, so that way you can better improve your story, we also have grading sheets behind the desk that you can request from one of the upstairs librarians. But yeah, so that being said, please enter into the first chapter contest. I would really love to see a lot of people enter into the first chapter contest. I'm very excited for it. Alright. So, the next point is, in starting your novel, is point of view. Now, there are lots of things to consider with point of view. One of the first things being, how close do you want your reader to feel to the character? First person tends to help the reader like step into the character's shoes a little bit, or almost feel like they're reading a diary, so they feel more real, right? They feel a little bit more tangible to us. Whereas third person tends to feel a little bit more like we're watching a movie, or we're hearing it from someone else telling us the story, right? Yes?
Why in first and third person do we skip second?
That is an excellent question. I'm going to mention second as the last point, so thank you for mentioning that. Then there's second person. The reason we skip second person is because that is generally for choose your own adventure novels. The reason why is because when you say you, that makes the reader feel like it's them, right? You're talking to them. You're breaking that fourth wall and talking about them. And so if you say you walk down the hall, well, what if I don't want to walk down the hall? That's why it tends to be the choose your own adventure stories. Every once in a while, people do what's called self-insert fan fiction, where they do you, and they're like, you walk down the hall and you see a tall, dark stranger. You know, those kind of things. But generally, those tend to be a very particular genre. And even then, people tend to be like, well, what about this? I wouldn't do this. And so you can lose a lot of readers with second person if you don't do a choose your own adventure, because of the fact that you tend, the reader tends to feel a little bit alienated if the narrator's making all the decisions for you. I mean, I don't know about you, but if someone just told me, like, this is how you have to live your life today, do it, I'd be upset. And I think that's why it upsets readers to read in second person and not have any choice in the matter. So, again, point of view matters. If you're going to choose second person, I would just warn you that you should either tread very carefully or do choose your own adventure. So that's why generally people skip over second person when they talk about point of view, is just because it's such a particularly picky set for point of view. Whereas with first person, you can't really complain about, oh, well, it's being told from his point of view. It's like, well, yeah, because it's his story. So there's less to be picky about. Or in third person, you can't really be like, well, she wouldn't do that. And it's like, well, she did, so. So yes, readers can complain about those kinds of things, but it's less likely because of the fact that you're the one who's telling the story. You're the one who's in charge. Whereas with second person, they feel like they want to be the one who's in charge. And so that feeling that they want to be in charge and yet they can't, that loss of control really bothers people. That being said, first person, I would say, helps them feel more close to the character, more like they're real, more tangible as a person. Whereas third person makes it feel more like you're hearing about a historical event in context, or you're watching a movie. Nothing wrong with either of those. I personally love third person because I feel like there's so much more I can do with it, because I can switch point of views if I need to. I can give weird details that the character might not have noticed if I need to. I can give descriptions that the character would never use. Now that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand. First person, you want to use descriptions that only the character would use. So for example, if they're a really rude kid, then they'll probably give a lot of rude descriptions of people, a lot of, not quite socially appropriate things. If they're a very kind of intelligent person, they might give a lot of logical or very almost scientific theory type descriptions, where they'll be like, of course the leaves photosynthesized into the beautiful brilliant green. I couldn't imagine any other color for trees. It's such a fabulous green of chlorophyll, whatever it's called, for the leaves. Anyway, point being, that with first person you're going to want to describe it the way they would describe it. However, third person, a lot of people get this mixed up. Third person, you don't have to do that. Sorry, I've had too many teachers and people tell me that you do. It's a lie. With third person, you are in charge, not the character. You are in charge of what things get described as. So if you describe something like, hey, her hair's hanging in her face like cobwebs, that's not the character saying that. That's you. So it gives you a lot more freedom to be able to describe things however you want. First person, like I said, helps them feel a little bit more real, helps them feel a little bit more tangible, helps them get into the character voice a little bit better. Third person, it's your voice telling the story about them. Then you have second person. With second person, it's tricky. It's somewhere in the middle. You have control over what they see in the story, right? But then they also have control over what they do. So as a result, it's kind of that middle ground between the two, where first person, you have to write it the way that the character wants, period, because that is realistic. Third person, you have complete control over the description and everything, including if it's from character's point of view or not. Second person, it's both. You get both freedom of description of the events and what's happening, but you also get their point of view because they get to decide. So second person is kind of that middle ground, and that's another reason why it's so tricky, because a lot of people want to just be completely in charge or just give away all that. And so being able to do both is a very delicate balance. I will say I have done a good amount of choose your own stories, and it's a really hard balance to try and hit. Alright, so that being said, we're going to move on to the next thing. Do you feel that covered second point of view pretty well? Okay. Alright. Now, I know we said we'd talk about beginnings, but beginnings are most important because of the first sentence. Now, a lot of people believe that you have the first paragraph to ensnare readers. Yes and no. I would argue actually no. Yes, technically there are some readers that read the whole first paragraph before they put a book down, but I would say that's not most of them. In a lot of articles that have been written recently and studies done by scientists, a lot of them have found that if they are not grabbed in the title and the first sentence, they're done. We have developed such a short attention span in media these days that we no longer read the first paragraph. You have 7 seconds to ensnare the reader's attention. 2 of those seconds will be spent reading the first sentence. The other 5 might be the second and third sentence. You are not going to finish that whole first paragraph. So, the first sentence has to really grab them, doesn't it? That being said, with first sentences, you want to keep the reader asking why. So, whether it's, it was a dark and stormy night. Well, why should I care that it's a dark and stormy night? Cool. Now, if you said something more like, it was a dark and stormy night, and Ella felt that she had never been more alive. You're like, okay, why does she feel like she's never been more alive? What's going on? So you gotta do something that will make the reader ask a question. Why? Because then as long as you can keep them guessing and keep them asking questions, they're gonna wanna keep reading. Why do you think mysteries and romances are so popular? Because the whole time you're asking, either with murder mysteries, who's the murderer, or with romances, you're asking, will they get together? That's a question that keeps you going through the whole novel, right? So it compels you to move forward. There are some stories that with the first sentence, it kind of leaves you questioning, and then you slowly ease into it, and then you keep reading because of the characters, not necessarily because you keep asking questions. However, I will say it is incredibly tricky to make your characters that lovable, especially within the first 7 seconds. Is it doable? Yes, absolutely, but it's hard. That's why having a really gripping first sentence is what's going to help you ease into that story and help you catch and ensnare those readers. So, get them asking questions. Keep them asking questions. Alright. Next. Alright. Now we kind of already talked about tone earlier. However, I'm going to talk about tone again with regard of the beginning of your story. Now, as I said before, we have about 7 seconds to ensnare your reader. If you make it past that first sentence, the rest of it is going to help dictate whether they keep going. Now, with the tone, you don't feel intimidated by this because ultimately you can fix it later. Editing's a thing, so just go. But if you're worried about tone in your novel, one thing I will say is think about what the main conflict of your novel is going to be. If the main conflict of your novel is going to be political drama, you need to make sure there's some political drama in that first paragraph that makes the readers go, oh my. Whereas if your main drama is fantasy related, you need to have within that first couple paragraphs, you need to have someone going, oh, someone just got stabbed, or someone's about to get stabbed. You know, you gotta have some sort of fantasy-based tension. A couple great examples of this are like with Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter, Hagrid comes out of the sky on a flying freaking motorcycle. That generally makes you go, yeah, this book is gonna be fantasy, and then his parents just died. That's fantasy action right there. You've set the tone. The end. Ta-da! And it's the same thing with other novels. I know, oh man, it's been a while since, I'm tired. I was trying to think of other examples, but it's been a while since I've read Fablehaven. So I can't even.
Fablehaven has like
8 chapters. I was going to say, I felt like it was slower. But that's okay. You don't necessarily have to set the tone perfectly within this first bit. I just will say the sooner you set your tone, the more easy it will be to ensnare readers. Why? Because of the fact that it feels more interesting to your reader to know what they're getting into. Oh, romance, that's a good example. So, with a romance, generally the first chapter you're going to want to set up, here is girl, here, or here's girl or boy, here's other girl or boy, or they, them, whatever gender you want to have them be. Point is, romantic interest meets romantic interest, and then you set up the tone for how they're going to fall in love. Are they friends? Are they, were they previously lovers and then they broke up for some reason? Are they enemies, kind of, but they don't really want to be enemies, and so that's kind of when they end up falling in love, you know, these kinds of things. So, tone is important. I think that with tone, you gotta make sure that you're following the lead of the story. You don't necessarily have to do the inciting incident in the first chapter. I would actually recommend you don't do the inciting incident in the first chapter. You build up to it. Like I said, we're going to do that next week. This is the build up. However, when you're doing that build up, you got to make sure you're keeping in mind, what is your story about? like I said, you gotta make sure that it gives that tone about what it's about, whether it's fantasy action, dark romance, mystery, just a classic high school or trying to get through high school kind of thing, you know. Do you have any questions? Okay. Alright. Let me erase this real quick. Alright. Okay, let's see. Ah, yes. Main characters. Now, in your beginning, you need to introduce your main characters. It's just that simple, right? Now, there is a caveat to this that we're going to talk about later, but for now, we're just going to talk about main characters. Make sure that if they are involved in your plot, they show up within the first chapter to first 2 chapters. I would say don't go beyond chapter 2. If they are pivotal to your plot, you have to introduce them quickly. Otherwise, the reader's just not going to care. They're going to be like, you took forever. That is fair. That is fair. See, there are some exceptions to this rule, but here's what I'm going to mention the exception in a minute, because that is a good point. With main characters, you want to make sure that you have at least the most main character introduced in chapter 1. Then you want to make sure any secondary main characters are introduced in chapter 2, I'd probably say is my favorite, but 3 or 4 are acceptable. As you were saying, you've got ones like Harry Potter where they don't quite introduce everyone until like chapter 4 or 5 maybe, I want to say. But yeah, long time. But they introduced Harry, right? And that was the biggest part of it, was the fact that there's Harry. Alright, and that being said, with main characters, you want to make sure that you give a basic description. You cannot just have them be a blob. I know we've talked about it before, but blob character syndrome is the absolute killer of beginnings. Why? Because we want to know what your character looks like. And there are 2 types of people. 1, the person who assumes what they look like because you didn't give a description. 2, the person who stops reading because you didn't give a description and now they have no idea what they look like and they refuse to form their own opinions. Those are generally the 2 categories of reader. So you either lose a reader because of the fact that they feel like they cannot come up with their own description and you didn't. Or they describe it on their own, they get halfway through the story and then you say red curly hair and they went, oh, I thought they had black hair. Lose them as well. So I would say if you don't describe your characters, how they look, even just the basics, you're going to lose readers, whether it's now or later. The best thing you can do is do it through action. So for example, they flipped their red curly hair and chuckled, their bright white teeth flashing in a smile. See, those are all actions. So you're not info dumping what they look like, you're just giving actions that then show what they look like. And especially, I would say, once you introduce them, you want to start doing things like that. Why? Because if you introduce them and you wait 5 paragraphs before saying they have black hair, then she's just going to sit there and be like, the heck, I don't know what they look like. Or if you wait, 5 paragraphs to mention they're a fairy, you go from this description of like, they're a normal person to poof, they're 2 inches high in wings. And you're like, what? Like, I don't know what I'm doing, It makes your readers lose the story. Why? Because the story is the most important thing up until the character changes. Then they go, excuse me, I didn't know. Or, hey, there are sometimes where, there are other races in stories, like in science fiction or fantasy, where you'll have unicorns or, cat people or all sorts of things like that. Make sure that you describe that. Because if you don't, your reader's going to be so confused. Right? Am I wrong? Your reader's going to be so confused if you're going along and then all of a sudden you're imagining this, like, I don't know, brunette guy with green eyes. And then all of a sudden they're like, boom, they're a black cat person. And you're like, pardon? There's black fur and whiskers on the face that I was just imagining as human? That's a problem. You gotta make sure that if you have other races, you make sure to describe them first. Alright. Now we come to caveat. Hold on. Alright. So, first, you don't want to introduce too many characters into the story. Hold on. Okay. You don't want to introduce too many characters into the story. That's why a lot of people like Harry Potter tend to, like the writer of Harry Potter, tend to wait. Because you're still getting used to Harry Potter, you're still getting used to Mr. and Mrs. Dursley and Dudley, right? And so as a result, and then Hagrid, that's 5. She actually was smart not to introduce Hermione, Ron, and the others until later. Why? Because if you had those 5, Hermione, Ron, Draco, all the others that are super important to the plot could keep going. Dumbledore, Ginny, Fred, and Weasley. All of a sudden you have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you're just going like, ah! Brain wants to have an aneurysm and explode. So that's part of the reason why she kept it to just the Dursleys, Dudley, Harry, and Hagrid. Because 5 is doable. I would say if you're introducing more than 5 characters in the first chapter, don't. Just don't. Introduce 5, introduce another 5 later. And even then, I would say space it out. Don't do chapter 1, 5 characters, and then chapter 2, another 5 characters, and then chapter 3, another 5 characters. Your reader's head is also going to explode. Slightly less exploding than if you did it in the first chapter,
Don't
but
put 5
still
characters
explode.
per chapter.
Exactly, just don't. It's a bad idea, even if you're doing stuff like Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson where they have like, a cast of 13 characters. Even then, they start slow. They have 3, and then 8 chapters later they add another 3, and then 8 chapters later they add another 3. They don't just go, bam, 20 characters, and you're going, ah,
Or
screams.
like Brandon Sanderson, he introduces characters over entire books.
Exactly. He generally introduces the whole cast over the entire first book, right? He doesn't just go,
Too.
bam, here's the whole cast. That is a way to intimidate your readers and have them curling up in a corner screaming. It's not good. It's just not. It's not that we don't like characters. We do. Like Percy Jackson. Oh my gosh, I loved the Percy Jackson books. But why? Because they slowly introduced the cast. If they did like, boom, here's all 8 people that are going to be showing up throughout the series and have plot relevance, I would have been like, brain hurt. No, curl up in corner and stop reading. And that's generally most people. I would say it's a rare person. Oh, could you please do that? I would say it's a rare person that you find that is able to take that many characters in that much of a sitting. You want to make sure to space that out. That being said, so that's part of the reason why I say introduce characters that are going to be plot pivotal within your first chapter or 2 chapters. However, you don't have to go in crazy with it. Make sure that you space things out, and that if you have a larger cast, you introduce them over the course of, a dozen chapters, the whole story, maybe even, depending on how large your cast is. You don't want to just dump 40 characters on the table within the first 5 chapters. Generally, your reader's going to die. Alright, so next thing is talking about info dumping.
The bane of my existence.
Yup, it really is.
What's so hard to not do?
I feel that. What?
It's just like so hard to not do.
So
Yes,
here's
he's
what
just getting good.
so I was gonna
All
say,
the
here's
fun
what we're
stuff.
gonna talk about. We're actually gonna talk about how to avoid it. So
Yay.
with info dumping,
It's my
because
special day.
because we're talking about beginnings and beginning your story and what to avoid.
Oh, I need so much help with this.
So I would say generally
Help me tell the story.
with info dumping, your main culprits are going to be world building,
Oh,
character backstory,
oh. No,
and
no.
the ever so prevalent fun one, villain backstory. These are your main
Those
three.
are so much backstories are my favorite things ever.
Exactly, but the problem is that then you start doing this because you love it so much.
Yeah.
it's the main issue
Gosh,
with life.
dang
But one of the things that you're going to notice with all three of these things is that you can do them gradually. So with world building, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do setting first, and you're going to want to show the setting as they experience it. So for example, if they're running down the street being chased by a bunch of royal guards, that's going to tell you they're in trouble with the law. You don't need to say they were in trouble with the law. That's info dumping. Having them running away from the guards, however, tells you everything without needing to say anything.
Fingers are frowning in the shadow.
Exactly, you got good old Tangled scene there. Why did that work? They didn't.
It's our little sister's favorite movie. It's
Right?
so cute.
What makes it so good though is that they didn't have a narrator just telling you, right? Because I mean, he was the narrator at the beginning, but that was kind of necessary for backstory purposes, right? But it was short. They kept it nice and short and sweet, right? For that backstory. So that's another thing you're going to want to keep in mind. For world building and character backstory, this is a great example of Tangled. You want to make sure that you are keeping it short and sweet. If you have something like that, make sure that it's maybe a paragraph or two. If you wrote out the narration of Tangled in the beginning, it'd be maybe a paragraph, possibly two, depending on how you break it up, right? And that's nice, because for the reader, it gives context without just being like, here's the story and history of the kingdom, 25 years worth. And you're like, maybe it's important, but if you're going to do that, take your time. I was going to say, that's why a lot of people skip prologues, unfortunately. Even if prologues are actually sometimes super good or super important and actually don't do info dumping,
I'm gonna
it's
bite
where
them
a
in the
lot of
butt.
people do
I'm gonna
info
have
dumping.
something like super important to the story,
Yes.
like a fun little Easter egg or whatever in the prologue, and if they skip it, sucks to be them.
Exactly. There are some people that do that. But that being said, with world building, I would say do it as they experience it. So, for example, it isn't plot pivotal maybe to know that the fairies have pink skin from the beginning. Probably not. Probably don't need to know that. It's a cool plot detail, I guess, but like you don't really need to know that. However, if you do need to know that later, or if they run into fairies in chapter 25, then mention that in chapter 25. Don't mention it in chapter 1.
As you're meeting the fairies, just mention that they have pink skin.
Exactly. Boom, you're all good. You don't need to mention it in chapter 1 and be like, by the way, fairies have pink skin, by the way, here's their whole court system, by the way. It's like, whoa, no. If it's not relevant, don't put it. Generally, I would say, go through your story, make sure you write it all down. Like, honestly, writing is the hardest part, so just write it. But then what you're going to do is you're going to have writing, and then you're going to go in and say, this is not plot pivotal, but this is.
Every single one of my editor manuscripts looks exactly like that.
I feel that. Exactly, because we have a tendency to do that as writers. We're all like, this is important, right? And then later we look at it and we're like, actually, it's not. Because it tends to happen. That being said, villain backstory. Here, let's touch on this. If you really need to know the backstory of the villain in order to move forward, make sure you show the backstory of the villain. Don't give me, and they were terribly abused by the king, and then the king killed their father, so now they want vengeance on the king, and when they killed their father, I'm bored. I'm overwhelmed and bored. That's how the reader's going to feel. However, if you're doing the villain backstory, and you're having them sitting there, hiding and cowering behind a tree, watching their father get beheaded, that's a lot more intense. You're going, oh my gosh, right? You're just sitting there like your heart's racing, you're feeling compassion and empathy for this person, and then all of a sudden you see them go to the dark side and start stabbing everyone, and you're just like, oh my gosh.
To be fair, I do the same.
So it feels intense though, right? Whereas if you just told him and his father got beheaded and so he started stabbing everyone,
Boring. No.
that's boring.
You
It doesn't
erase
feel
it.
good. You're just like, it's okay.
No.
That's something you do for a children's book for 9-year-olds,
No.
where you'd be like,
No.
by the way, this guy is evil. Yay. They do that a lot in books for 9-year-olds. Is that acceptable for that? Yes, because
What is
for
a 9-year-old?
because they're 9-year-olds,
They
exactly.
don't care about a good plot twist. They care about they got married and then they're kissing. Ew, they're kissing. Like,
No, pretty much, exactly.
No.
Or
I
different
like
things
the
like
book
one of my favorite ones as a 9-year-old was the Daisy Meadows Fairies series. Why? Because it was adorable. Literally every first chapter starts with Rachel and whatever her name was are best friends and they help fairies. Would that be good writing for YA? Absolutely
no,
not.
no, it wouldn't.
But for a 9-year-old book,
It's so
absolutely.
cute.
It's
It's
so
freaking
cute. It's
adorable.
great. So do keep in mind this is for YA to adults specifically, and some junior fiction.
Yeah,
Some
but
junior
the
fiction is
Daisy
darker
Meadows
than
fairy
others.
books are also designed for girls.
They are designed for
You
girls.
are in fact a boy.
Well, like most of the books for 9-year-olds, I'm like bored. You know how
Because you're special. You are in fact a Williams kid. special.
This is fair. There are some people who don't like that, and that's perfectly fine. But that being said, with the villain's backstory, just make sure that you hit 3 points. You make sure you show the villain's backstory. You don't tell it. You make us feel empathy for the villain, and then you show just how twisted they really are to make us truly hate them. Those are the main 3 things that you want to
Make
do.
them infiltrate the government and then take it over and kill it.
There you go. And then if you need a character backstory, make sure that you actually don't reveal the whole character backstory. Because what's the most interesting part about a character story? What's one of your favorite
The
parts?
intrigue.
The intrigue.
Like, she's
Yes,
so
when
like
all of a
lonely
sudden
and
they're
sad,
like,
but why?
exactly, but why? Or then you'll have moments where you have a side character that's like, I don't go home very often. And then you learn it's because they actually don't have any parents and they're living by themselves. And then you're like, oh. Whereas if you told us that from the beginning, we'd just be like, oh, that's sad. But because you've gotten to know them and love them, when you reveal that secret later, all of a sudden you're like, wait, my heart. Because you care now. So with character backstory and info dumping, just make sure that you keep in mind that you don't reveal everything. I would say keep at least 10 or 12 secrets from the reader. Yep.
What if I want to keep everything from the reader? Keep them guessing.
They
then
can be
they're
small
gonna hate
or
me.
large secrets. So like you can have a small secret like they have a crush on the other main character. Or you could have it be a large secret like their parents are secretly dead. Or you could have it be a tiny secret where it's like actually all of their chocolate cake that they bring is always bought from the store at Smith's.
Ouch, that's kind of sad.
And so they're like, hey, I made this. And then it's like, actually, I didn't.
You're a fraud. But I respect that.
Right? But yeah, so like, there you go. With that, you have a secret, right? Whether or not it's a big secret doesn't really matter. I actually saw this one on Instagram the other day that made me laugh my head off. But it's one of those secrets that would make a great main character thing. So I saved it. But basically what it said was that she didn't like peanuts, but she loved peanut M&Ms. But she didn't like anything else peanut butter, Reese's Pieces, those kinds of things. And so as a result, she got tired of people telling her, hey, why don't you like peanuts? And so as a result, she was just like, I'm allergic to peanuts, and lied about it. And so that's her secret, is that she's tired of people judging her for not liking peanuts. And so as a result, she's like, I would just tell people I'm allergic, and then every time that she saw peanut M&Ms, she always had to be like, oh right, I've told everyone I'm allergic, so even though I like peanut M&Ms and not anything else peanuts, I can't eat them.
No, what do you do? Hide in a corner and then eat them.
That was the funny thing. She
Then
mentioned
you
that
pour
her
your
husband
butter.
actually stole, like when they were at a party and they had peanut M&Ms and he like pocketed some for her.
That is
Yes,
adorable. I
right?
love that.
Exactly. I was like, I love this, but it's a secret. And it's not a very big one, right? It's one that people wouldn't be very upset about if they learned. They'd actually probably laugh about it, but it's a secret nonetheless.
And then you can take it and make it important to the plot.
And then you could make it crucial to the plot.
Yeah, secret. I'm hearing voices in my head. One of them's named Travis. Let's do this.
So I would say you have 10 or 12 secrets that you keep from
That's
the
why
reader.
every single
I
one of
would
my
say
characters is
probably
named Travis.
6 that are plot pivotal that you reveal over the book or the series. And then I would say have about 4 to 5 that are more just like small things that were interesting character details. Alright, now with world building, as I said, you don't really need to do it until they experience it. So for example, in Mistborn, this is a great example of it. She doesn't experience everything all at once, does she? It's gradual. She's taught about these things. She slowly learns about these things. She introduces you to the world as she sees it, and then you slowly are introduced to the world as he sees it. I don't remember his name. But, point
The
being,
boyfriend or the mentor?
the mentor. What's his bucket?
Gotcha.
What's his bucket? It starts with a K, I think.
Yeah,
That
not
dude.
entirely sure on pronunciation, but it's Kelsier.
There we go.
Yep. Yeah, is it like Kelsier or Kelsier or something? Exactly.
Yeah.
Brandon Sanderson names, just as a reference.
Yep.
They're not going to be pronounceable.
No, yeah, pretty much anything that's epic fantasy and has names will not be pronounceable. You just look at the name and go, that one.
Yeah.
That being said,
Which is exactly why I said the boyfriend or the mentor.
yeah. So with the world building, make sure that just like in Mistborn, you experience it slowly. Even if you're not writing an epic fantasy, it's really important to introduce things slowly. If you're just like, by the way, here, and you just hand them a bunch of info dumping, the reader's just gonna be like, oh my gosh, and just fall over. However, if you're like, here's one thing and here's another thing, it's kind of like eating a pie. Have you guys ever done that before where you're like, I'll have one slice of pie, and then 4 slices of pie later you've eaten half a pie? Whereas if someone told you, do you want to eat a half a pie? You'd probably say no. You'd probably be like, that sounds a little overwhelming.
Yes, I do beginning week.
Exactly. Like, give me time to eat that half a bit of pie. Don't just eat that half a piece of pie in one sitting. Generally, we don't like that. Our stomach doesn't feel good.
I'll do it. How would you like to be punished?
And that's one of the ways that you can generally gauge how much is acceptable for your reader. Generally, if you tell someone, hey, how many characters do you think should be introduced in the first chapter? Most people don't say more than 5.
20 of them.
Yeah, if you do that, that's a good way to lose your readers and have them go cry in a corner and lose their minds.
Either are not good at writing, which is a lie, you're actually really good. Or you're crazy, which I don't get to say because crazy is me, not you.
Well, I'm not
That
as
being
crazy
said,
as someone.
so make sure that with your world building, you just introduce it gradually. You're doing little slices of pie. You're like, here's a little sliver of pie. You're not going, by the way, you have to eat this whole key lime pie in 2 minutes. Then they're going to go like, what? Why? Exactly. Yes. Literally, that scene is a perfect analogy for info dumping. That is how someone feels with info dumping, where he's like shoving the last few pieces in his face. Yes.
What's his bucket?
Yep.
Bruce
From Matilda.
Bogtrotter, that's
Yep,
his name.
there we go, Bruce
If you feel
Bogtrotter.
like you're Bruce Bogtrotter eating a cake, you've done it wrong.
You've done it wrong. However, if you feel like you've had a lovely little slice of chocolate cake and you're good, then you've done it right.
Yeah, or if you feel like you're at one of those buffet things and you just keep on serving up seconds, like that, very good.
Exactly. So with info dumping, those are generally things that can help you remember to avoid most of the time. All right. Next is, we already talked about how to describe characters, but / introduce them. Let's talk about what to avoid. I know we've gone over this one already, but it's important to remember.
Oh my god.
Mirror scenes are a big no. They're cheesy, they're cliche, they're outdated, they're old, moving on. I've only ever seen one mirror scene that has not been cliche ever. And that was because of the fact that she was describing herself as if she was a zombie, but she was a normal person. And so I was like, I actually kind of like that. It's an interesting vibe. It's not just, I have brown hair. It's like, my hair is falling in my face like I'm a decaying zombie, and I was like, I'm intrigued. You know? So you can do it in a unique and original way, yes. However, just keep in mind, if you avoid it altogether, you're more likely to do something original than if you try really hard to take something that's cliche and make it original. You can do that, but it's a lot harder. It's like when it would be like me trying to take this down by myself without using a step stool. It'd be really difficult.
Just like rip it, or
Exactly, I'd have to
lighter.
rip it off the wall.
Why just grab a lighter?
Yes, or just have a light. Yeah, in other words, I'd have to destroy it to do it, right? And so that's kind of how it feels with the cliche, is that you're just making it harder on yourself. Is it doable? Yes, but you are making it harder on yourself. Keep that in mind.
Yeah,
So-
I think the only way you can like actually use a mirror in a story and like be good is either if they're real vain.
Yeah, that's
like,
true.
Whatever.
Very
their face,
narcissistic.
Snow White, whoever.
Yes.
Or if they like have a new like a black eye and they're just like, whoa, that's new.
Exactly, or if their face is completely changed because they've switched bodies or something like
That'd
that,
be sick.
then you'd be like, crap,
Like,
I'm a
new
dude.
face.
Last time I checked, I was definitely a woman. Like, that would be something interesting.
Or
you
you're
know?
It's a forensic. You keep on
That is
pronouncing that wrong,
It's
and
forensic.
it's bugging the crap out of me.
Yeah, no, I do it just because of her, like,
Just
yeah.
because of me.
yeah, because it bugs you.
Anyway, that being said,
I also like punching you.
with
Does that mean I
the
should do it
mirror
more
scene,
often?
with the
I know
mirror
how to
scene,
now.
I would say the best way to
Okay.
describe things, as I mentioned earlier, is to make sure you show, don't tell, and generally to show through action. Especially if you're doing more than one character, because that makes it so much easier. And you can show through action in a kind of telling way, kind of like with Harry Potter's Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, right? They do a lot of telling in that first paragraph. However, the way they tell is in a showing way, where it'll be like, Petunia Dursley was a total snoop, right? So you're imagining her snooping around with her big long nose. She mentioned, like, so as she's
Sure.
mentioning these details, you're able to kind of see it.
She's also like super
Almost.
skinny, right?
She's also like Twiggy, yes,
Yeah.
like very
She's
super
It's
skinny,
gay.
yes.
or Ben, or I know a lot of sticks.
Anyway,
Or, well, yeah. The Damon's like obvious because you can see his arteries. Like,
those moments when you're just like, you okay, bro?
yeah, no, you can
Yeah.
see his muscles right here when his fingers move.
Yeah, see, there you go.
It's
That's
freaky.
That's something you can do to show how skinny they are, though, right?
Yeah, but that's a
Giving
normal
that
muscle movement, not
description.
a giant divot when he moves his middle finger.
That description right there helps give an image, though, right? It helps show what he's like. And it's
How
the
does
same
he
thing
even
with
do
writing.
that?
You got to make sure that you have a way to show it,
Right.
even if it's a partial show, like with Harry Potter, where you're like, "Hey, she's snooping around, and she looks kind of like a." I don't remember how she describes her, but it's kind of metaphoric, where
A rat.
she's like, yes, exactly, kind of like a rat snooping around, like
He's a
she.
sniffly rat and I want to
Exactly.
my foot.
And
but
so
by
as a
the
result,
side.
it feels more like you can see it, right? Instead of just feeling like she is skinny, she is tall, she has a sharp pointed nose.
She
She's
is
a
tall.
snake,
I
and
want
under
to shove her
brush
against
it
the wall.
under her.
Exactly. That just makes it kind of like, okay, that happened.
So fireman,
All right. Okay. The next thing that you want to do is all right. You want to establish the main conflict within the first 20 pages.
I'm just gonna stop breathing real quick. Just don't mind me.
But yeah, so generally, if you haven't introduced the main conflict within the first 20-ish pages, that's when you start getting in a little bit of trouble as a writer, because then you're going to start losing your readers. You have 20 pages to get those readers hooked, and if you're not hooking them by that 20th page, they're probably going to put the
They're
book down.
gonna put it down.
Yep. Yes.
And
Or
you don't
what
want your
is
readers
too
to put it down.
Well, what
Unless
about
they buy
2,000
it.
pages?
Then you're definitely bored and they're not going to read it.
Yeah, but usually what people do before reading the book is they either read the synopsis
Mhm.
or they read the first chapter.
Right.
The first chapter doesn't introduce the main conflict, they ain't gonna buy your book.
Yep, this is true. And even if it's just a light hinting, like I talked about at the beginning of the video, you can give a hint of what's to come. For example, if your novel is about political intrigue, you could have someone betraying the king in the castle, but they don't know who. And it takes them 20 pages to figure out who, maybe. But at least you're introducing the idea, right?
Yeah.
And so it's similar with this. And
Guess
make
what?
sure that you
Person X
have an
is traitor,
idea.
but we don't know that, and you gotta read the rest of the book to find out who it is.
Exactly, exactly. It's important that you have those lures that make the reader go, oh, I see.
Like,
Or-
actually, they know I have to stay up all night and read your stupid book.
Yes, or even like murder mystery novels. That's why they're so popular, right? Because the whole time you're going like, do they catch the killer or do they run free? And same thing with
Or do they
romance
get
novels.
killed by the
Do they
killer?
get together or do they
Or
break up
does the
horribly?
killer get killed?
Or does the killer get killed? Exactly.
There's
Fuck, you
two
don't know.
killers. It's like, here's what I like to call a taste of your own medicine. It's great.
And then
But
you
yeah,
have to
someone's
find-
following.
So
and then
with
you have to find the
establishing
killer
the
who
main
killed the
conflict,
killer.
just make
And then that
sure,
killer gets killed.
irregardless of if you're doing an epic fantasy novel, irregardless of if you're doing an epic fantasy novel, a romance novel, a young adult novel, doesn't matter what genre you're doing, make sure that within 20 pages you've at least introduced it. You don't necessarily have to make it like the inciting event doesn't have to happen within 20 pages, but you have to at least introduce the idea.
I never really trusted Jack.
Wait, what?
So,
I don't know. I was around. Well, it was really like a trade thing.
there we go. So,
If you're gonna have a whole betrayal traitor thing, do it well. And by do it well, I mean foreshadow it better.
Oh yeah. Well, like that was like.
I
being
never
said-
did
all right,
trust Jack.
the last
if
thing.
you never trusted Jack, then the betrayal wasn't gonna be a big like surprise. Like, how dare you? It's gonna be, yeah, saw that coming.
But no,
It's
that's why
not-
you
it's
have to have
gonna
it
be a
not be
surprise.
Jack, and then it's a surprise.
Yeah, see,
Everyone?
There is a way to do it. There,
No,
there's a
figure out
banana
what's
sprint.
Yeah,
Be
you get
nice.
that. You get it back eventually.
Anyway, so
she's stealing.
I'll sit.
I'm a kleptomaniac. You should get used to this.
Anyway,
I have stolen everyone's candy at least once.
so but that does happen though. I watched a murder mystery one
Not
the other
giving
day
it.
where the whole time they were like, "I'm certain it's so and so," and it was not so and so, right?
I feel
And that
like
makes it all
every-
more
It
interesting.
was their crush.
Who's the person they trusted most?
I feel like
See-
murder mysteries always do that though. Like the person that they suspect is never the person that it actually
Right?
is.
Or the other thing that they do is they do suspect them, but there's no way it can be them, right? Like the person's in a coma. And they're like, how did they commit murder? They're in a coma. So it's one of those
Yeah,
things
you
where you
see,
either
it's
have
because he's
it's
not
not the
actually in a
person they
coma.
expect, or it is the person they expect. But how the crap? So
because magic. That's
yeah,
how.
that was one of my
Okay.
favorite ones actually. There was a murder mystery one where literally he was like, I'm certain it's this man who's been in a coma for 3 months. And they're like, sir, the murder was committed yesterday. And he's been in a coma for 3 months.
Like, well, yes,
But
actually no.
Right, and so they did a cool complicated little thingy there and it made sense in the end. But like generally that's why it's important to make sure that when you do foreshadowing, you do foreshadowing in such a way that if you're gonna do one of those plot twists, you almost
So
see
then,
it
no, I
coming.
couldn't let you die. I had to kill you myself. That's one
Alright.
of my villains. Like, not gonna lie, that is absolutely one of my villains.
See,
So-
like, Maestro, one of the villains is gonna be like, respect. Like,
So the last bit that we're gonna talk about in today's
That's not
character
respectful.
goals.
I know.
No.
So-
you need to make it ask.
It's like, hey, can I kill you? No. Dang.
Alright, so
Overhand
goals.
control your children instead.
Generally, you want to introduce your character's goals again within the first 20 pages. If your character has no goals and is just being shoved around the story and abused by your writer, people don't enjoy that.
I
I'm
enjoy
sorry.
it.
Well, you
Wait,
enjoy
wait,
it as a
that's
writer, but as a
actually-
reader, do you enjoy having someone who's just like, I have no goals in life,
But
so
what
I
if
will go left?
But what if you do it well?
There
What
is
if
a
the
way.
dude who's just like depressed when he's like, I don't care what's
They did that
happening
well
in
in
life.
Hunger
I'm just
Games.
gonna be depressed and you're all gonna enjoy it. Except this dude is like super supportive. Like, no, you're gonna come with me on this quest because you're freaking amazing and I need you.
See, there you go. You can do
They did it.
complications.
Story idea.
You can do complications that make it interesting, that make it so that people actually have motivation to move forward, even if it's just someone's dragging them along. That's still
Right there,
motivation.
here, aggressively.
My grandma always
So-
does that.
Sounds like your grandma.
Generally, you do need goals, whether it's goals as in my goal is to go back and watch that whole TV series after I'm done, or if it's as complicated as this villain needs to die because I need to discover who murdered my lover. You know,
Well,
it's complicated.
This villain needs to die because he said that I didn't look good that one day where I did.
See, then that's when you have a narcissist
My
for a main
Villain
character.
needs to die because my brother's missing and I'm pretty sure he did it.
Exactly. See, there you go. You need goals. Even if they're not complicated goals, they can be simple goals. But as long as they are a goal. This
What?
is what makes short stories so
Am I, like,
good.
actually
You
good at
pick
writing?
one goal and then you reach
Better than mine.
toward that goal.
Debatable.
Alright. Any questions about beginning your story?
Well, no, but I do have a different question. Who's better writing, Gwen or me?
Gwen has more experience, so by default, she would be a better writer, but that doesn't mean you don't
If
have
we're
just as much
talking
potential.
raw skill, it's you.
No. It's you.
I would say you both have equal amounts of potential as writers. It's just a question of how you utilize it
No.
and
She's
also
better. She's
years.
better. She's gonna become an author. She's gonna become a writer because I'm gonna.
Yeah, that's what Dad's saying too, and I'm like, hey, cool, I'm just gonna be a writer all of a sudden. I love that. Since I actually do, because it's fun.
You're like, I'm actually okay with this. That being said, though, all right.
Yeah, no, just totally.
Any questions about starting your story?
Introduce me to a dude at Maverick saying I'm
No,
gonna
it's
be
been
the
very
next
helpful
big
because I
diva
have to write
writer.
like a really
Okay.
long essay. in
Except
English,
he
so.
actually did it. She was
Valid,
still a writer,
valid.
working at
All right,
Maverick.
I'm going to pause this video then. Oh, reminder, we do have a first chapter contest that is this month. It is due by November 30th. If you want one of the entry forms, grab it at the front desk. Yeah, you don't need to do your whole novel, just the first chapter.
The first chapter.
Every time I try,
Suck at
I
anything
always
but
like.
first chapter.
Cause I give them a random chapter just in the smack dab middle of the story, because if so, I already have that written.
That's fair. So with National Novel Writing Month, we also had an Indie Author Day as of last Saturday. If you're interested in looking at
You
any of
knew
their
about
books,
Yeah, I got an email about it.
And you didn't talk about it. Like you
No.
didn't say a word.
Anyway,
How are you my brother?
So with the Indie Author Day, we did do a recording of them all reading about 1 to 3 minute clips from their books. So if you are interested in supporting some wonderful, lovely indie authors, just go listen to them reading their clips and then pick one. And feel free to ask for it for Christmas and support them. They're wonderful people. I will say there is one though that I will give a caveat on. I believe it's called Bangaresh. It is a science fiction novel that sounds absolutely fantastic, but he said it is definitely PG-13 rated because of language and stuff like that, and violence.
I
So-
mean, I've seen rated R movies. I think that's fine.
So that's why I was like, if your parents aren't comfortable
Make
with you
yours
watching
clear.
PG-13 like
Yeah.
violent and cursing movies,
Yeah, but
maybe
you-
don't pick that one.
Yeah.
But otherwise, because the little thing that he
Was
read,
it though?
I requested that they all pick G-rated stuff because we'd be reading it out loud in the middle of the library. So his little section that he reads is G-rated, but he specified that the rest of the book is pretty violent and full of some cuss words. So,
nice.
so if you like that one, just keep in mind, ask your parents before you do that. I don't want your parents getting mad at me. But the rest of them all should be pretty dang G-rated, pretty clean, pretty good. So, that being said, all right.
It just mirrors
So-
the G rating for cowards and kids.
Anyway, so thank you guys for listening to the lesson. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. And again, if you have any questions about Indie Author Day or want me to turn on the video, I can do that too. And for those of you watching this video, it is just in under both Indie Author Day videos, the Teen Writers Club videos, and the Adult Writers Club videos. So I put it under everything writing related. So as long as you look up the American Fork Library, you should be able to find it.
Yeah. Just use your eyes.
Yep.
Just get good.
Observe.